You're watching JCT TV. This is Bible study for the 21st century. So friends, welcome. Always good to have you. And you may be watching nationally in Canada, you may be watching nationally in America, you may be watching internationally on the internet. Isn't that internet amazing? Gee whiz, people watching all over the place. But wherever you're watching, I'm just doing my best to kind of grind through the Gospels. And right now, we're almost finished Mark chapter 13, where Jesus talks about the end of days. Fascinating stuff, right after the break.
WOW works with local churches in needy countries. We mobilize those churches, pastors, and volunteers in a concerted effort to care for orphans and widows in their homes and villages. Through that strong faith-based platform, we're able to not only provide food, medicine, and crisis intervention, but we're also able to lead these afflicted ones to faith in God. It's powerful, humbling, and well worth the effort. Please support WOW with your generous gifts and faithful prayer. Thank you.
So friends, I've been going through Mark 13 with you. Several programs ago, I read the whole chapter, which I usually don't do in the program. And I've been just going through it, taking my time. We've seen what Jesus says about the end of days in terms of false messiahs, war, national, international tensions, earthquakes and famines, persecution, gospel to the nations, which is the key one, desolating sacrilege, widespread tribulation, false hopes, celestial convulsion, that's 10. 11, the parousia, the return of Christ, talked about that last time. And now, this is the last point, the ingathering of the elect, as he calls them. I spent a lot of time last program talking about that word elect. By the way, if you've missed former programs, you can just log on to jimcantelontoday.com or the YouTube Jim Cantelon, and one way or the other, you can, it takes a little going to find exactly the program, but you can catch up to where we're at. Okay. Verse 28 of Mark 13. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see these things happening, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away. My words will by no means pass away. Now, do you know how much controversy has sprung out of this statement from Jesus? Well, you can figure it out. He's talking to his disciples 2,000 years ago. And he says, this generation will not pass away till all these things take place. Obviously, he was wrong. Was he a false prophet? Was he a false Messiah? Look at it in the context, friends. First of all, let me get rid of the red line. Learn this parable from the fig tree. Jesus taught the most profound things through the simplest natural phenomena. Time and time again, he taught great truths about the kingdom of heaven by referring to the birds of the field, seed being cast on the ground, all these nature parables that he told. Some of them were not nature parables, but many of them were. This is a nature parable. Fig trees. Well, fig trees are commonplace in that part of the world to this day. By the way, have you ever had a fig off a fig tree when it's ripe? Man, oh man, oh man. I remember in Israel when I lived there, one of the highlights of my life was to pick a ripe fig right off the tree. I'm salivating thinking about it. When its branch has already become tender, puts forth leaves, you know summer. In other words, the ripe fig tree is not, the ripe fig is not there yet, but you know it's coming. It's coming. So also when you see these things happening, as I said last program, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day in God's sight. Okay, so from God's perspective, we might be in day 2 after these words by Jesus. It's been what, 2,000 years? So maybe we're in day 2. I'm not going to make a doctrine about that, but just think about that. He's not just talking to those who are assembled around him, he's talking to you and me. And remember, I made the point a few programs ago, verse 10 is absolutely critical in chapter 13 of Mark to understand everything else. The gospel must first be preached to all the nations before any of this other stuff becomes relevant. You know, so do I think, you know this, that there are all kinds of unreached people groups in our world yet. The Christian faith is huge. It's bigger than all the others, but it still has a lot of room to grow. And there's still huge need for going into all the world and preaching the gospel as Jesus mandated his disciples should do. So we haven't yet reached the whole world with the gospel. So until that happens, then everything else that we're reading about here has a certain here but not yet component to it. All right? It's really important. So the generation that sees all of these things happening, which must include the happening of the gospel having reached all of the world. Right? Man, I preached this in Jerusalem for the 7 years I pastored there. I've written about it in many of my books. To me, it's a really critical pivot point, the gospel going to all the world. That generation, or the generation that sees this generation, will by no means pass away till all these things take place, till everything is culminated. All right? Heaven and earth will pass away. My words will by no means pass away. In other words, you can trust what I'm saying. That's what Jesus is saying here. Okay? But of that day and hour, no one knows. So all of you people out there who figured it out, don't give up your day job. You're dead wrong. Not even the angels in heaven know. Nor the Son, capital S. Who's that? Yeah, Jesus. He says, even I don't know. The only one who knows is the Father. The only one who knows is the Father. Yeah. So what's the takeaway? The takeaway is not another book on prophecy. The takeaway is not another TV show on prophecy. The takeaway is not another internet special on prophecy. The takeaway, and I want to underline this big time, take heed, watch and pray, for you do not know when the time is. In other words, live with an expectation, an anticipation that the coming of the Lord is near. It's interesting, when I was growing up as a preacher's kid in Saskatchewan, on the prairies of Canada, I can't remember, and I remember a lot of sermons, because my dad was the preacher and he was a good one, but I used to have visiting evangelists come through, and then my grandfather was a preacher, all my uncles were preachers, my great-uncles were preachers, my great-grandfather was a preacher. You talk about the family business. My 3 children are all pastors. It's in our DNA, I guess. But it's ultimately the calling of the Lord that is the critical component. But nevertheless, I don't remember hearing a sermon. It didn't matter if it was Christmas, New Year's, Easter, baby dedication, funeral, wedding, without the pastor referring to the soon return of Christ. It's not something you hear a lot of these days. And I'm not faulting anyone, but I'm just reminding myself, let alone you, that Jesus said, if you want a takeaway, if you will, from what I'm saying about the end of days, this is your takeaway. Take heed, watch, and pray. In other words, watch. Be on the alert. Don't be asleep. It's interesting, when you have that sense of, the theologians call it imminence, the imminent return of Christ. It brings a certain mitigating influence to some of your own personal agendas. I said, now just hang on a bit here. What is really important right now? Yes, maybe that new car is important, maybe that new house is important, maybe that whatever is important, but yeah, okay. But what's more important is that you're living on borrowed time and Jesus is at the door. Are you ready? Are you ready? That's really the underlying message is here. Watching, what's for? You're watching to be ready. Are you ready? Man, I remember all kinds of songs, gospel songs being sung when I was a kid, basically asking that question, are you ready? Jesus says, look, it's like, verse 34, it's like a man going to a far country who left his house, gave authority to his servants, and to each his work, and commanded the doorkeeper to keep watch. Watch, therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming. In the evening, midnight, crowing of the rooster, which means early morning, or in the morning itself, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And what I say to you, I say to all, and there it is again, with an exclamation mark. Watch. Watch. Now, as I was listening to, these warnings from the pulpit when I was a kid, I'm just a little guy. I really committed my life to Christ when I was 5, believe it or not. I had a powerful experience with the Lord when I was 5. But, I was impressionable, and I heard again and again, it pounding away almost at me. Watch, watch, watch. I'm really not over it, and I don't want to be over it. You live with a sense of anticipation. And when you live with that sense of anticipation, it has a profound impact on what you value. Okay? What are the lasting values? What are the sustainable values? Well, my love for God, my love for neighbor, my love for my wife, my love for my children, and my love and respect for what it is God has called me to do, which is what I'm doing right now with you. There's other values I have, certainly. I'm as human as you are, but the core values are what I've just stated. You have to ask yourself the question, in the light of Jesus coming, what are my values?
The Bible tells us that true religion is visiting orphans and widows in their distress. The Bible also says that God is a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows. Heaven's core values for mankind begin with God's heart for the least of these. When you support WOW, you're in the sweet spot of God's heart for the poor. Yes, we're only a small player in this great drama, but at least we're on the field. Please give generously.
So, last teaching, I finally got to the end of Mark chapter 13, and like I say, man, I am just scratching the surface here. Okay, some of you perhaps have studied this far more than I have, Maybe you've read much more than I've read, but the point is, Mark 13 is a really important chapter, and it's well worth taking the time as I've taken it to digest it. This is one of those chapters you got to eat it slow, as you digest the word of the Lord. Okay, let's move on into Mark chapter 14. After 2 days, it was the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The chief priests and scribes sought how they might take him by trickery and put him to death. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar of the people. And being in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, as they sat at the table, a woman came having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. Then she broke the flask and poured it on his head. But there were some who were indignant among themselves and said, why was this fragrant oil wasted? It might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. And they criticized her sharply. Jesus said, let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She's done a good work for me, for you have the poor with you always. And whenever you wish, you may do them good. But me, you do not have always. She has done what she could. She's come beforehand to anoint my body for burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as memorial to her. Wow. We refer to the events surrounding Jesus' arrest and trial, if you can call it a trial, crucifixion, as the Passion narrative. These events took place over the course of roughly a week in the period preceding the Passover and then the Passover day itself. But here we see in Mark that really the Passover narrative as such begins with Bethany and the betrayal of Jesus by Judas. And I didn't read that part yet. I'll get to that, the betrayal part. But let's talk a little bit about Passover. First of all, Passover, Pesach as it's called in Israel, is a hugely important event. It commemorates the deliverance of Israel from 400 years of slavery in Egypt. And you read about that in Genesis and then Exodus. An amazing deliverance, effected by God, an intervention, if you will, by the Almighty. And through his intervention, upsetting everything in Egypt to the point, through 10 plagues, to the point where Pharaoh said, get out of here, go away. And with Moses in the lead, the children of Israel and all their belongings and all their animals, I mean, we're talking about probably 200 or 300, I should say 2 or 3 million altogether, people and animals and slaves and servants and so on, left Egypt. It was a huge, huge event. Passover. The Passover meant this, that on the night when they were to leave, they were to take the oil of a slain lamb, the meat of which they were to eat. They were to anoint their doorposts with this blood, and the angel of death, as it flew over Egypt, would slay the firstborn of every household other than the households that had the blood on the doorposts. I know people read that and say, whoa, really? That's the historical account. I don't like it any more than you do. But that's what happened. That's why it's called Passover. The angel of death passed over Israel. Pesach. Israel, of course, wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. You read about that in Exodus. In Leviticus, there were certain laws and rules and regulations that were applied by Moses. In Exodus 20, you read about the 10 Commandments. But altogether, there were 613 laws of Moses. Most of them had to do with protocols and rules of hygiene and religious ceremony as related to this huge amount of people who were murmuring all the time and ready to rebel all the time, and at the same time trying to be controlled spiritually by Moses and his brother Aaron, who was the priest. And I mean, it was a shemazel. You read those books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, I should say, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and your eyes glaze over at times. You got to read it slowly. Passover, however, over the course of centuries was lost. And it wasn't until a young king by the name of Josiah came along that Passover was rediscovered, that Hezekiah also. These two kings, Josiah and Hezekiah, made a huge, huge event of Passover. And it is still, to this day, celebrated by not just Orthodox Jews, but conservative Jews, Reformed Jews, most Jews, even secular Jews around the world. Passover occurs on Nisan 14. It's also referred to as the month of Aviv, Aviv means spring. The month of Aviv is sort of the first month of the sort of the religious year. It's a one-night event, but as you may know, day in Israel starts the night, the point where the sun goes down. That's the beginning of the next day. So today, for instance, started last night when the sun went down. It's very confusing. So the Passover then, that we're talking about here in Jesus' time, would start at sundown on Thursday. Passover this year was a Friday. Passover would start on sundown at Thursday. The sun shuts down on Thursday. At that moment, Friday begins. Okay? So the morning, if you will, this is very confusing, of the Friday is the time when it's dark. I won't confuse you anymore. I was confused enough when my wife and I and our 3 children moved to Israel back in 1981. It took us forever to capture, the concept of Shabbat, Sabbath, starting Friday night at sundown. In those days, and it's still the case in most of Israel, everything shut down. Actually, what happened before sundown on Friday, about 2 in the afternoon, things would start to slow down. The buses would stop, the traffic would stop. And I remember looking out, my office window many times once we were established there, and it seemed to me like Jerusalem would just kind of exhale at around 2 in the afternoon. And around 4:30, 4:45, just as the sun was setting, you'd see family groups in their Shabbat best dress, with flowers and a bottle of wine, walking to their parents' home to welcome the Sabbath for what's called the Kabbalat Shabbat meal. Beautiful, beautiful tradition, one that we picked up on, and we did it ourselves, even though we were Gentiles. And many times we visited our Israeli friends at their invitation for Kabbalat Shabbat. We'd be there just before the sunset, and the candle ceremony and the breaking of the bread and the pouring of the wine and the blessings over the bread and the blessings over the wine, kind of like a weekly communion service. I loved it. I still do. And whenever I get a chance to celebrate Kabbalat Shabbat or Passover with Jewish friends, I just love it. Just love it. Anyway, Passover starts, in this case, right at the point where the sun sets on Thursday night. Now it's Friday morning, okay? All day Wednesday of that week and all day Thursday, so 2 days before Passover, there will be preparation. And this is the way it was in Israel when I lived there. It still is that way now. And it is that case for most observant Jewish families. It's not as though, it's like Christians with Christmas. I mean, you just don't make your preparations for Christmas on Christmas Eve. Okay? You're planning sometimes a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in advance. So there's all kinds of preparations going on Wednesday and Thursday of that week. So there's supplies you have to purchase. If you lived outside of Israel, outside of Jerusalem, you have to be making the pilgrimage up to Jerusalem for Passover. You would have to have made some kind of plan for staying overnight for a few nights. Most of the pilgrims would have tents. Those who had a bit more money would have had opportunity to have booked places to sleep, in little hotels, or we'd call them now B&Bs. But the point is there was need for preparation, need for supplies, need for firewood, need for tents, need for sleeping mats, food, all that kind of stuff. So there's prep going on. The Passover lambs would be sacrificed before sundown on Thursday. Okay, and then they had to be eaten before midnight on Friday. So there was a certain time pressure there. All this is going on. While this is going on, the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees especially are having a committee meeting. We got to get rid of this guy. It's time to play hardball. He's upset us enough. And so he's going to be here for sure. Let's see if we can capture him somehow and kill him. Not during the feast, but we'll kill him right afterwards. This is what was going on behind the scenes at Passover.
Why dance when you have very little? When you live from day to day with food insecurity, rampant disease, sickness, and death? You dance because your heart is full of love for God and your hope is strong. WOW has come alongside as the hands and feet of the Lord, providing both home-based care and assurance of God's love. You're happy and you've got to dance. Please support WOW. Let's keep them dancing.
Friends, do we ever appreciate your support? I'm telling you, hello, we couldn't be here doing this without your support. And it's not just a case of doing this. And by the way, Cantelon's Casual Commentary is available for you. All of Matthew, I have 2 of Mark available if you ask for it. And we also will soon have an entire book, Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John, which I'll make available to you. But it's just my little gift to you as you give a gift to our work. I'm not asking anybody to, give the kitchen sink. I'm just saying, do what you can, do your best to help us come your way, both with this Bible teaching and also with our work with orphans and widows overseas in Africa and India. You see the promos on the show, you know what working for orphans and widows is all about, and we're one and the same. JCT and WOW, one and the same. You support the missions, you support the teaching. You support the teaching, you support the missions. And together, guess what? Good things happen. Thanks for watching. See you next time.